Okay, so we're back with Proclus with his commentary on the Timaeus, and we're commenting on this passage where Timaeus is looking at whether the world was generated or not, and he says it was generated, but that is in the wider sense of the term generation. We've gone through different senses in which something can be said to be generated, and Proclus's position will be that it is generated in the sense that the stuff of which it is made is of a generable character, and it's generated in the sense that it is caused by something else. So, generated can be used synonymously with cause in the widest sense. But, like Aristotle, for instance, only uses generation in the strictest sense as pertaining to the sublunary sphere. Um, and so, we're just clarifying that kind of confusion. The world was generated in the widest sense, but in the strictest sense, it does not have a beginning in time. Generated things begin and end. The world itself does not begin and end in time. We'll pick up where we left off. But let us recur to our principles and discuss the affair as follows. Whether is the world perpetual being in the same manner as the eternal, or is it not eternal, but consubsistent with time? And whether is it self-subsistent, or produced by another? Such then is the inquiry. Is my capture? I think my capture is messed up. Let me try to fix this. See if that'll work. No, I have to go smaller on the text. Okay, that's fine. And whether is it self-subsistent or produced by another, such then is the inquiry. But the answer is that it is produced by another and is consubsistent with time. A thing of this kind, however, is generated. For if it has a composite form, it has a generation according to the composition. And if it alone subsists from another cause, it is generated as not being itself productive of itself. So those are two senses of generation which conform to the universe. If likewise it is not eternal, it has the whole of its hypostasis according to time, for it is fabricated on account of another and is generated as a flowing image of being. Hence, as that which is composite is to that which is simple, and as time is to eternity, so is generation to essence. If therefore a simple and uniform essence is eternal, the essence which is composite. I'm having a computer issue. Can you guys hear that static noise?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, it's just playing out of the speakers.
Yes.
I don't know why it's playing. I just turned the speakers off. Okay. It's fine now, right?
Yes.
Okay. If likewise it is not eternal, it has the whole of its hypostasis according to time, for it is fabricated on account of another and is generated as a flowing image of being. Hence, as that which is composite is to that which is simple, and as time is to eternity, so is generation to essence. If therefore a simple and uniform essence is eternal, the essence which is composite, multiform, and conjoined with time is generation. For it is divinely said by Plato that the world originated from a certain principle. For that which is generated in a portion of time began from a temporal, from a producing, from a final, from a material, and from a formal cause. So that's interesting. He's done 5 types of causes before, but he would usually use paradigmatic. So here, the 5th type of cause is temporal cause. So, and we have a distinguishing between temporal cause and producing cause. Um, I hope he elaborates that concept of temporal cause, because we have not seen that elaborated elsewhere. Okay. Um, so we have the four Aristotelian causes plus temporal. And temporal, I guess, would be what most people think of as causation, like one thing succeeding another thing and leading to a new state of affairs or causing another state of affairs. For that which is generated in a portion of time began from a temporal, from a producing, from a final, from a material, and from a formal cause. For since principle is multifariously predicated, that which was once generated has a beginning of generation according to all these causes. The world, however, originated from a certain and not from every principle. What, therefore, is this principle? You must not say it is a temporal principle, for that which originates from this is also allotted the principle of generation from all the rest. Okay, so of the multiple senses of generation, that which has a temporal cause, like something that precedes it, which brings it about, not in the sense of the efficient producing cause, the demiurge creates from eternity. He's not a temporal cause, but he is a producing cause. So the temporal cause, that which has that, is generated in the strictest sense, and so will have principles according to all the others as well. And so, according to Plato's meaning in the text, he can't be referring to a temporal principle, because then it wouldn't be a certain principle. It necessarily has all those principles. But it originated from that principle in which he afterwards instructs us, I mean, the most proper, or the final principle. For it was generated on account of the good, and this is the principle from which its generation originated. All right. He says, therefore, that this is the most proper principle, so that this may be called the principle of the generation of the world. Hence, in the first place, he shows that the world is generated from its composition, for it is visible and tangible. These, therefore, are the extremes of the universe. For the heaven is visible, but earth is tangible. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so he like encompasses the whole spectrum by saying visible and tangible. All right. So he says it's generated because of the nature of the things of which it's composed. It's composed of things that take part in generation. Individual parts come in and out of being. The whole doesn't, but the parts of it are generable. For heaven is visible, but earth is tangible, and visibility is in earth so far as it participates of light, and tangibility in heaven so far as a terrestrial nature is antecedently comprehended in it according to cause. So that's the way all is in all in this case. Light contains, or I guess fire contains earth in that fire causally contains the principles. Because it is higher, it kind of necessarily contains the principles of what is lower. So, okay. But the world is simply visible and tangible, and has a body in order that you may also assume the middle plenitudes which it contains. So he gives us the limits on the spectrum to define the domain under discussion. And this again is asserted by Plato conformably to the oracle, which says, "It is an imitation of intellect, but that which is fabricated has something of body." So far, therefore, so that's Chaldean oracles. I'm surprised there's not a footnote saying which one. So far, therefore, as the universe has something corporeal, it is generated, for according to this it is visible and tangible. But everything visible and tangible is sensible, for sense is touching and seeing. That, however, which is sensible is the object of opinion, as being mingled from sensibles, and not able to preserve the purity of intelligible forms. But everything of this kind is generated, as having a composite essence. So it's not just that the essence or the matter of the universe comes and goes and is generable in that sense, but also it's visible, and anything visible is perceived by opinion, and opinion perceives things that are generable. So, for both those reasons, because it's sensible and because the parts of the universe come and go, the universe has a kind of generable essence or matter or substrate. Plato, therefore, does not subvert the perpetuity of the universe, as some who follow the Aristotelian hypotheses fancy he does. And that this is true we may easily learn from hence. He says that time was generated together with the heaven or universe. If, therefore, time is perpetual, the universe also is perpetual. But if the universe had a temporal beginning, then time also had a temporal beginning, which is of all things the most impossible. Okay, so if time was generated together with the universe, then they share properties. So if the universe has a beginning, then time has a beginning, but that's impossible. Of course, you could argue that in some other sense, time was generated together with the universe. That doesn't entail that one having a beginning involves the other having a beginning. But okay. They say, however, that time is twofold, the one disorderly, but the other proceeding according to number. For motion is twofold, the one kind disorderly and confused, but the other orderly and elegant. But there is a time coordinate to each of these motions. That a body, however, may be moved equably or anomalously is possible, but it is impossible to conceive an equable and anomalous time. Okay, so time doesn't differ according to species, whether it is the time of disorderly or orderly motion. Therefore, the idea that, orderly time had a beginning, which is some Middle Platonists take that interpretation about the beginning of time or the creation of time and the world, that it's from chaos. There was a pre-cosmic chaotic time, and then cosmic time had a beginning. And Proclus is here saying, well, time, it's not different insofar as it's time, whether it's chaotic or orderly motion. For thus the essence of time will be a composite. And why do I say this? For when the motion is anomalous, time is equable. There are now, therefore, many motions, and some are swifter, but others slower, and one is more equable than another, but there is one continued time of all these, and which proceeds according to number. Hence it is not right thus to make a twofold time. So, yeah, I mean, I think that makes obvious sense. Like, for time to be the measure is for time to be time. So for there to be a time of disorderly motion, we have to weigh more or less orderly proceedings against one another. So time of its nature can't be not numerable. Time is the number of motion. And that numbering will be orderly, whether the motion is disorderly or not. Hence it is not right thus to make a twofold time. If, however, time is one and continued, if indeed it is unbegotten, the universe also is unbegotten, which is consubsistent with time. But if it was generated, an absurdity will follow, since time, in order that it may be generated, will be in want of time. And this, though it does not yet exist. For when time was generated, time was not yet. Yeah, that's the most obvious self-contradiction of saying time had a beginning. Okay, so the time when time began is an absurd notion. Or a time before which time did not exist. Farther still, Plato conjoins the soul of the universe immediately on its being generated with body, and does not give to it life prior to the corporeal formed nature, but as soon as it is constituted, encloses it in body. Moreover, he says that soul ranks among beings that always exist. Okay, so because souls always exist, and the world soul is given the world body immediately, therefore the body of the world soul always exists, the universe always exists. If therefore he makes body and soul to be consubsistent, but soul always exists, according to him, body also is perpetual. But that which is at once consubsistent with the perpetual is unbegotten. Again, Timaeus here says that the soul was generated, but Socrates in the Phaedrus says it is unbegotten. So we have I was waiting for that reference. Where does Plato say that souls rank among beings that always exist? In the Phaedrus. Hence, he after another manner calls that generated, which is clearly unbegotten according to time. Right. Farther still, he says that the world is incorruptible, which is also granted by those who oppose him. But in the Republic, he clearly asserts, or rather the Muses, that everything generated is necessarily corrupted, assuming in this place generation according to time. For these things, therefore, you may understand, or from these things, you may understand what I say, for the world is thus demonstrated to be unbegotten. For if the world is incorruptible, but nothing which is generated according to time is incorruptible, the world is not generated according to time. What occasion is there, however, for these syllogisms? For Plato in the Laws clearly says that time is infinite according to the past, and that in this infinity there have been myriads on myriads of barren and fertile periods of men. For investigating the beginning of a polity, from which cities change into virtue and vice, he adds, but you will say, from whence? I indeed think from the length and infinity of time, and the mutations which take place in a thing of this kind. Or rather, that we may argue from what is in our hands. A little prior to this, we may hear him saying that where there is neither extreme heat or cold, there the race of men always exists, more or less numerous. But if the race of men always exists, the universe also is necessarily perpetual. Again, therefore, if the demiurge ranks among eternal beings, he does not at one time fabricate, and at another not. Okay, this is kind of relevant to anyone who wants to argue interpreting Plato on time having a beginning or not. This is book 2. I don't want to get lost in the text. Can one of you guys see which chapter this is? Volume 1, book 2. What? Which chapter in the commentary?
I'm scrolling to try to find it.
Again, therefore, if the demiurge ranks among eternal beings, he does not at one time fabricate, and at another not. For if he did, he would not have an invariable sameness of subsistence and immutability. But if he always fabricates, that which is fabricated by him always exists. Did you find it? Or?
I'm still scrolling.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of text here. Alright, so if he did, he would not have an invariable sameness and immutability, but if he always fabricates, that which is fabricated by him always exists.
It's just book 2.
There's no chapters, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so book two, volume one, book two of Proclus's commentary, he addresses this question and argues from statements made in the laws, statements made in the Phaedrus, and the Republic. The Republic, laws, and Phaedrus. He cross references. All right. For why, being willingly at rest for an infinite time, did he at length convert himself to fabrication? Was it because he apprehended it to be better? Was he prior to this ignorant that it was better or not? For it sounds like he's arguing against Christians now at some level. For it is absurd, being intellect, that he should be ignorant, since there will be about him both ignorance and knowledge. But if he knew this, why did he not before begin to generate and produce the world? And if it was better, why did he not persevere in this energy, if it be lawful, so to speak? For it is not holy to conceive that, being intellect and a god, he would pursue that which is less instead of that which is more beautiful. It is necessary, however, to admit these things if the world is generated according to time and is not consubsistent with the infinity of time. Those also appear to me to sin against the demiurge of the world in another way, who say that the world once was not. For if it once was not, there was a time in which the demiurge did not make it. For that which is made and that which makes subsist together. But if there was a time in which he did not make, he was then a maker in capacity, and if he was in capacity, he was imperfect, afterwards perfect when he made. If, however, there is prior and posterior about him, it is evident that he does not belong to natures which energize eternally, but that he passes from not making according to time to making. Moreover, he produces time. How, therefore, having an energy which is in want of time, does he produce it through this energy? For he once produced time, of which he is indigent, in order that by his effective energy he may produce time. This, therefore, cannot be otherwise. After this opinion, however, let us direct our attention to Severus, who says that the world simply considered is indeed perpetual, but that this, which now exists, and is thus moved, was generated. For there are twofold circulations, as the Eleatic stranger has shown, one of which is that which the universe now circumvolves, but the other the contrary to it. He's talking about from the Statesman, the myth of the world kind of being wound up by, I guess, Kronos, right? And then winding down into entropy. People are born out of the earth when kind of the order of the world is reinstated, the cosmogonic rejuvenation, in other words. The world, therefore, is generated and originated from a certain principle, which is the cause of this circulation. The world, therefore, is generated and originated from a certain principle, which is the cause of this circulation, but simply considered, it is not generated. This interpretation, however, we shall oppose by observing that it is not proper to transfer fabulous enigmas to physiology. For how is it possible that the soul which moves the universe should be weary and change the ancient circulation? So he's interpreting the myth from the Statesman metaphorically, not physiologically. How also is the universe perfect and sufficient to itself if it desires mutation? How can there be an alternate change of circulations when both that which is moved and that which moves preserve their proper habit? And how does Timaeus say that the circulation of the nature which is characterized by sameness is moved to the right hand according to the demiurgic will, but that which is characterized by difference to the left hand? For if it is necessary that the works of the demiurge should remain invariably the same and be perpetual, it is likewise necessary that the circulations should be always the same, and that the period characterized by sameness should be moved to the right hand, but that which is characterized by difference to the left. For they proceeded at one and the same time from the demiurge, and were allotted this circulation. Farther still, it is not necessary that inequability must thus be introduced to the motion of the universe. Is that not necessary, if we suppose the myth literally to be true? For everything which is about to cease from its former motion and to pass on to another hastens to the contrary, i.e., to rest, and causes the precedenious motion to waste away. For if it continued fixed in the same energy, what is the cause of the second circulation? By no means, therefore, are these interpretations which are not physical to be admitted. Nor again must such explanations be adopted, though they are more rational, as those which ascribe generation to the world in conception only. For thus we may also infer, according to conception, and not according to truth, that there is a demiurge of the universe. Okay. So, he doesn't really give his interpretation of the statesman myth to say why Plato gives it, specifically if it's not physiologically accurate. I wish that was included. But okay. And then he goes on to another set of interpreters who say that the world has generation, but only in conception. Sort of like how, I guess, Damascus says that all things in the first hypostasis are conceptually distinct, but not in reality. So the monad and definite dyad, these are different in our conception, but the first hypostasis is an utter unity beyond difference anyway. So that's the kind of distinction we're talking about, where in itself there isn't an ontological division, but still there's an analytic division that is useful. So I guess the world as generated could be treated as an analytic division or description, but it's not really generated. For thus, we may also infer, according to conception and not according to truth, that there is a demiurge of the universe. And the problem there, of course, is sacrilege. We shouldn't deny the real existence of the gods. For from admitting that the world was generated, it is demonstrated that there is a producing and demiurgic cause of it. Or it may be said that the universe is admitted to be generated for the sake of perspicuity. So another interpretation, it's to make it clearer, saying it's generated, and the doctrinal method, in order that we may learn what the numerous goods are, of which it participates from the demiurgic providence. So maybe it's like a fable saying it's generated is just to make it clearer. For this is indeed in a certain respect true, yet is not sufficient to the theory of Plato. For the perspicuous, says Iamblichus, is venerable when it is adapted to science. For admitting also that the universe is perpetual, it is possible to point out the goods imparted to it by the gods, and thus much in opposition to these interpretations. Okay. All right. So he's leaving those interpretations behind. Again, however, let us show from the beginning after what manner the universe is said to be generated. For it is neither so according to time, through the before mentioned arguments, nor simply because it proceeds from a cause, since it is not sufficient to say this. So simply the fact that it proceeds from a cause doesn't warrant the term generation, or doesn't explain the full sense of generation. For intellect also is from the first cause, and all things after the one are from a cause, yet all things are not generated. In the widest possible sense, I think he admitted once you could call things generated in the same sense that the gods are said to be generated in Hesiod, for example. But that's not, enough to warrant using the term generation for Plato here. For where does the eternal subsist if all things are generated? Right. For the one is prior to eternity. After what manner, therefore, it may be said, is the universe generated? As that which now is always becoming to be? So what's the particular sense? As that which now is always becoming to be, and at the same time always was becoming to be, or rising into existence. For it is not that which is partial. Body, therefore, i.e., partial body, is not only generated, but there is also a time when it was generated. But the whole world alone subsists in becoming to be, and is not at the same time that which was generated. It is also, according to Aristotle, always in the end, the always being temporal according to temporal infinity. For as the solar form, light, proceeds from its proper fountain, thus also the world is always generated and always produced and is always becoming to be, and at the same time always was so. As a composite, likewise, it is generated. Okay, so we got the first sense, it's always becoming to be and always was becoming to be. And in the second sense, it is a composite, and so it has a generable character. For all composition is generation. But if it is always, but if always composed, it was always becoming to be, with which to be generated concurs. If it was always composite, it was always generated. And it appears to me that Plato, knowing this, says it was generated instead of it is generated. Just as real being, he says it was instead of is, for his words are, whether it always was. For as in the intelligible, the was and is are the same. For all things are there according to sameness, since all things are in the now, which is more impartible than the now which is according to time. Thus also it is generated and it was generated proceed to the same thing in every sensible nature. For it was generated as that which always was becoming to be, and as generated it is. But that a thing generated, when it is assumed according to a certain time, does not indicate that which is simply a composite, is evident from its opposite. Let's read that sentence again. But that a thing generated, when it is assumed according to a certain time, does not indicate that which is simply a composite, is evident from its opposite. Okay, when you talk about generation according to generated at a certain time, you're not simply saying that it's a composite being, you're also saying that it has a temporal cause, I guess. For to this Plato opposes perpetual being. Right. If therefore a perpetual being manifests that which is simple, we must say that what is alone a composite is generated. But if every eternal being signified that which is always according to time, that which is originating from a certain thing would be said to be becoming to be. So he's like saying, if the terms kind of shifted and anything composite had a beginning in time but if eternal being signified that which is always according to time, if eternity meant perpetuity, that which is originating from a certain thing would be said to be becoming to be. So the next level down, things like the universe, though perpetual, is becoming to be, but then generated in the strictest sense, if eternity were perpetuity, then becoming to be would be becoming to be in time. For that which is generated is not opposed to the eternal so far as it is generated, but so far as it participates of time, on which account also it is generated. Okay, so this like dancing around of the terms, I'm not going to mess with too much. I feel like there's a coherent way that you could spin this around and I kind of get the gist of what he's trying to do, like justifying why it's generation in this particular sense and not a higher sense or lower sense, but we're just going to keep going. For that which is generated is not opposed to the eternal so far as it is generated, but so far as it participates of time, on which account also it is generated. That perpetual being, however, or that which always is, manifests the eternal is evident, since the demiurge also who produces time is called perpetual being, and the paradigm likewise is thus denominated. Hence it signifies an eternal hypostasis and not that which participates of temporal perpetuity. So we're calling things one level up or one level down by analogy. We're calling the demiurge perpetual by analogy, like as strictly speaking generated things are to perpetual things in time, so is the world of generation to eternity. And so, relative to generable characters that are recognizable to us, we can call eternal things perpetual. Or, like from flipping it around the other way, we can call perpetual things eternal in a certain respect, but it's by analogy. And he's trying to like highlight the true, proper sense of these terms as well. But yeah, it's a lot of terminological confusion in that last passage, so we'll move on. Someone, however, who acknowledges this may nevertheless doubt why we have said before that the world is generated from having a body, for as there are in it a body which is alone generated, a divine soul which always is, and a divine intellect prior to this, why do we say that it is generated on account of its body, and not denominate it unbegotten on account of its soul or its intellect? So because of the bodily character of the world, we call the world generated. Well, the world soul has, or the world in total has a soul and an intellect. So can't we call the world some characteristic because of those other parts? It is said, therefore, that the whole world is everywhere characterized from form and not from the subject nature. For do we not call Socrates mortal, though he has an immortal soul, because the animal which is in him is mortal? If, however, you say that we now consider the corporeal formed nature of the universe not yet co-arranged with soul, you will speak rightly. But when you see it animated and endued with intellect, you may call it a god, for thus Plato in the Republic calls it a divine generated thing. But in this dialogue he thinks fit to denominate the world a blessed god. In the very words also before us, he in a greater degree celebrates the universe. For as he is about to call that which is unbegotten, viz. Soul, generated, though he attributes an unbegotten subsistence to eternal natures, thus also he calls the world generated. So in the same sense, he elevates the description of the world. It's not a derogatory to call it generated, because he also calls souls generated, despite them being unbegotten and perpetual. For it is not when denominated generated diminished by a juxtaposition with the eternal. He likewise conjoins the becoming to be of it with it was generated, in order that as all, or the universe, he may evince that it is perfect in being, but as having its essence in time, that it is generated. He likewise assigns to it the principle of a certain and not of all generation. And according to its corporeal formed nature, he calls it generation, omitting the divine powers in it, through which it is happy and is called a god. So in different respects, the universe is generated, in other respects it's not. We call it by this attribute and not that because of this reason. It's a lot of clarification of terms and why this term, why not that term in the text, different interpretations. I think we're tracking it well enough. I don't know that some of this material we have to commit to memory. The comment on the eternity of the world and the justification of the interpretation, bringing in the Phaedrus, the Republic, and the laws, is definitely one to remember because it may come up in discussions with people who want to interpret Plato as saying the world had a beginning in time, and I think Proclus effectively argues that it doesn't. Of course, the statesman counterpoint could be made, and Proclus says we shouldn't interpret the statesman literally because it conflicts with this other, more general Platonic interpretation of cosmogenesis, but he doesn't give the other interpretation we should have of the statesman. So that's kind of a hole in the argument, but it is what it is. We're left with a hole where we don't want one. If only there was a surviving commentary on the statesman, then it would be cleared up. But alas. So, all right, any other comments on the reading today? Then we'll go ahead and leave it at that. Pick this up soon. Usual groups tomorrow. Thanks everybody for participating.